We got something different this time, folks. It's time to bring together some adjacent worlds that fit together in so many ways and so few at the exact same time. So, to start, a riddle. Bear with me. This is about you. You do 300 kph into a parking spot. You grab your chalk bag out of your car, which you clearly keep in your car at all times. No ropes, no harness, nothing like that. You're gonna scale a building, a skyscraper, mind you. Don't forget, no ropes. You get to the top of the building, there's a rocket ship there waiting to take you into orbit. What does any of this have to do with fintech? No idea, right? It's a good connection, bear with me. Okay, so we spend so much time calculating risk-reward ratio of strategy decisions, and the group that's put this together and is bringing up right now, Feedzai, provides the infrastructure for so many of these decisions and helps mitigate risk across the rest of the onboarding process and the life cycle of the customer. So, see it now? Sexy answer, right? Well, luckily, we've got some legends here to discuss their visceral experience with risk management through a human lens. So, I'm gonna get a little boisterous with these intros, so bear with me for my overly exuberant American nature here. But let's bring some energy for these folks. So we've got Susie Wolff on the track, Formula E racing driver and CEO of Venturi Racing. Also, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, complete badass. So if I wasn't, here we are, but she's a badass. Tim Peake, British astronaut and the man who sorted out the science behind afternoon tea in orbit. That's what happens when you send the English into space. And Alain Robert, the human Spider-Man and absolute inspiration to free solo climbers everywhere. If you were in Vegas last year, we had Alex Honnold. This year, we've got Alain. It's a whole bunch of people climbing things that will make your hands sweat. Few master free solo climbing on rock to the point that they decide to take a step up to scaling buildings. This wild man that is dressed in a wonderful, wonderful suit that you'll get to experience in a moment will tell us about that. But the man who brings it all together, Nuno, co-founder and CEO at Feedzai. This is gonna be a fun one. I'm fanboying all over the place. So let's get our hands together. Let's bring them up. Let's get the energy going. Nuno and team, come on up.
When you have, a Formula One pilot, an astronaut, and a free climber, people that climb, we take the stairs on buildings. Alain takes the outside of the building, maybe a shorter route there. So, without further, let's start some questions. I mean, we've all proved through all your amazing stories, your amazing life journeys, that what it takes to make a right decision and to manage risk. And keep cool. Backstage we were talking about, it's about keeping a level of serenity when you're going through these decision-making processes. So for all of you, how do you guys, and I'll just start with this order, how do you guys prepare for, risk management, for taking those decisions and routines, approaches? What would you tell this crowd on how to manage risk? Tim, you start.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm really looking forward to this panel because we're going to have very different answers, I think, in our attitudes to risk and the way that we approach it. But certainly, as a test pilot and as an astronaut, you're working within organizations that are trying to mitigate the risk down to as low as possible, but still to achieve the mission. And so we really work on three principles. The first principle is to understand the risk. The second one is to quantify it, and the third is to mitigate. And understanding the risk can sometimes be the hardest thing, because you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. And so when you're putting together a risk matrix, or you're looking at a spacewalk, or you're looking at a high-risk flight trial, it's what's going to bite you that you haven't seen. And that's where it's really interesting to kind of get outside influence. We'll often just bring in a mortgage advisor or a school teacher and to come and sit on our panel when we're doing something. Somebody with blue skies thinking, what are we missing here? What have we're too focused, we're too blinkered, what are we not seeing? So understanding the risk that you're taking is important. And then quantifying it, not just with a wet finger in the ear, but some serious number crunching, really trying to analyze what is the probability of this from actually happening, and then mitigating it. And once you've got those three things done, you've mitigated it down, as an organization, it's a decision. Is the organization, are you personally, willing to accept the residual risk that remains? If it's a yes, then let's crack on and do the test flight, or let's crack on and do the spacewalk. If it's a no, go back to the drawing board, go through the process again until we can come up with a solution that works. So it's really those kind of factors.
I like that. I'll pick up on later on the lateral thinking. Susie?
Well, like Tim rightly said, I think we're all going to have different answers. For me, obviously, the position I'm in now, running a team, it's very much about calculating the risk, because we're not trying to mitigate all risk, because we want to have the fastest car. So we need to push the limits to make sure that we're able to have the quickest car on track. But having the quickest car isn't going to guarantee you winning the race, because you need the car to last the race distance. So it's always about calculating the risk, figuring out how far you can push the boundaries, but still have reliability in the car that you make it to the end of the race. So like Tim touched upon, it's always about calculating the risk, knowing how much risk you're willing to take in order to get the performance of the car, but then also mitigating the risk of failure. Can the part actually, at that level, make it to the end of the race? So there's a lot of very, very clever engineers working behind in the background, trying to figure out what are the limitations of each piece in the car for ultimate performance against reliability. If you switch that over into being inside the car, and I was a former racing driver before I moved into the management side, it's a lot about knowing what the risks are you're taking. Because obviously, we're aware that motorsport can be dangerous, but every time you get in a car, it's very much a calculated risk. You know what the worst outcome can be if you're going in to take an overtake at a certain corner, if there's a gravel bed or there's a wall. You know exactly what level of risk you're taking in that moment. You have to have trust in the others that you're racing against, that they're also going to be respectful and aware of the risks. But it comes down in the end to preparation. Knowing that you're getting in a car which has been prepared to the best of the ability of the people that you trust in the team. And then when you're out there driving and on the absolute limit of the car, and you're not talking about being in a comfort zone here, you're talking about pushing the car to what we call dancing, which is that part of the car which Lewis Hamilton so sweetly finds so very often, where you're absolutely on the limit of what the tire is able to do. And that's very much about having the preparation done in the background, and then always calculating the risk out on track to know how far you're willing to push it and how much risk you're willing to take in a moment. Are you fighting for a podium? Are you fighting for a win? Are you fighting for a world championship? So it's very much about calculated risk, but always knowing what it is that your end goal is.
Cool. Alain, how do you?
Well, me on my side, actually, it's not as mathematic as the way that they are preparing their things, because I am just, with myself, and then in front of the wall, and I am having to do it. And it's very simple. It's a do or die stuff. So it can't be any more extreme than that. So of course, I am trying as much as I can to be physically prepared, which is the easy stuff, but it is more about being mentally prepared. Because that's not that actually I am accepting to fall and to die, but somehow I know that this is one of the possibilities. And sometimes, yes, I know that before an ascent, I am a little bit stressed up. But the good thing is I am knowing myself, since I have been free soloing now for more than 4 decades. And then once I start climbing, I put my fear aside and I do my job, my mission, my passion. Actually, I've been living like that my whole life. And it's very pleasant, because the feeling when I am reaching the top, I feel like being born again. It's like if somebody was, each time I was challenging myself, I am having a new life. I was starting a new life, and then it is priceless. It's a very enjoyable feeling.
Whoa, that's cool. Thank you. So, I mean, I'm a big believer in lateral thinking, and this panel, I think, represents that. I mean, people unrelated to our industry, but that in their lives manage risk, to an extreme level, And I think to us in financial services is about how do we go about put out new products and new services while managing, an acceptable level of risk. But our lives literally does not depend on it. So I think we have a bit of an easier job. So Tim, coming back to you, acceptable risk. Elon Musk says something like, well, there's a 50% chance that rockets fail. I mean, you happen to be sitting on the tip, of one of those, right? And what's acceptable risk? I mean, how do you guys define? And you can relate it for the audience here. Levels of this is acceptable, this is not. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point there, because when Elon said 50-50, he was talking about one of his uncrewed test flights. And I think that's really important, is to adjust your attitude to risk depending on the circumstances. So we wouldn't take a 50-50 on a crewed launch. But during the R&D phase, why not? He had the ability to say, well, I'm going to give it a 50-50. I'm going to learn just as much from this test flight if it fails than if it succeeds, perhaps even more if it fails. But when we launch into space, we've got a 1 in 30 chance of not coming back, which is obviously much better odds than the 50-50. But it is still a case of what is an acceptable level of risk, and when do you take that? And that comes down to, as I mentioned, like personal level of risk and an organizational level of risk. Your personal drive and ambition to achieve something.
Is your personal level of risk acceptance different than the one of the organization?
I think I've got a higher acceptance of risk. I think in space we've tended
You're Maverick and Top Gun.
Well, I just think we tend to be a bit risk averse at times. And to give you an example, when we were training down in a cave, our training process is all about health and safety and risk as low as reasonably practicable. And I said, look, when we go on a spacewalk, nobody is going to be there to check that we're tethered, to check that we've got the right safety mechanisms in place. It's all down to us to make sure we survive. And when we were in the cave, they wanted instructors with us at every moment. And it was a very difficult decision to be able to say to ESA, look, remove the instructors, give us the training, give us the qualification we need, and let us go down the cave and do it ourselves. Because that's what gives us the confidence.
Did you guys actually do it yourselves?
And we went and did it ourselves. But it was a big move for the European Space Agency to be able to accept a higher level of risk during training that they would otherwise have been ready to have accepted. So I think we can be a bit risk averse. In test flying, we're not so risk averse because the mission is to push the limits. It's to find out what the aircraft can do. It's to make the aircraft safe for frontline pilots. And in order to do that, the mission inherently involves more risk.
Whoa, that's cool. So, Susie, coming to you, you were telling a story in the backstage that I found fascinating, which is to do, teamwork, where, in this case, Lewis Hamilton's life was dependent on it, that he was in the track, and he was racing, and all the work that had to be done halfway across the world. Do you want to tell us that story and how team effort and data collection and metrics come into play?
Absolutely. I mean, many people presume that motorsport, particularly Formula One, isn't a team sport because it's the driver out on track, it's him that stands on the podium. But the truth is there are around 2,000 people in the background building the car from scratch. And no matter how good a driver is, I'm not sure who in the audience is following Formula One just now, but that driver is only ever as good as their car. And right now the Mercedes car isn't quick enough, and Lewis is unfortunately having to struggle in the mid-pack. And the incident that I referred to was at the Malaysian Grand Prix a few years ago. In Formula One, the data is live, which means as the car is running out on track, there's around 800 data points sending data back to all the engineers, not just in the garage at the track, but also back in the base in England, where the wider team sits. So he went out for the last part of qualifying. He was obviously going to be fighting for pole position. But on his out lap, the lap that gets you ready for your flying lap, there was an issue on his engine. It came flashing up on the dash, issue. The engineers had seen that the issue had arisen. Someone back in base in Brackley quickly found the solution to the issue on the engine, radioed back to the track, to the engineer, to change the mode on the steering wheel. By the time Lewis was 2 corners from starting his flying lap, the engine was in a different mode. He had changed on the steering wheel, and they'd resolved the problem, and he went on to get the pole position. So that's really, I think, a really good example of how important data is, because that live data, they weren't able to very quickly find the problem and solve it. And that also means that you've got to know exactly what data you're looking for, because obviously 800 sensors on the car, you're creating a lot of data to work through. But when you have the expertise that knows exactly which data to sift through to figure out the problem, you then have the speed in turning around the issue and fixing it. And motorsport is absolutely about teamwork and about being able to identify which data is the most important for getting performance, because in the end, we can know everything about how good the car is or how it's performing out on track, but it's ultimately about making the car quicker and identifying which areas of the car bring the most performance.
Well, thank you. I mean, all of that happening while the guy is racing, and we're all, very comfortable watching it in our couches, right? I think it's amazing that it goes halfway to the world, and it really talks to the level of teamwork. So we've talked about, different levels of risk management. We talked about data collection and telemetry, let's say. Alain, I mean, yours is a completely different way of handling risk. I mean, you've climbed the Burj Khalifa, the Petronas Towers, and whatnot. After you make the decision, you're at the bottom of the building. You make a decision, I'm going to start the climb, right? And there were a few times where you got halfway, and you're kind of like, and you showed me the video earlier where you tried 5 steps, and then you decided to step down. Walk us through your mind process of, I'm going to go do it, and then when you get to a certain level, doing it or continuing or not.
Well, everything is depending on how difficult is my target. Meaning, for example, I did stuff like 30 years back, and I don't know, my mind at that time was kind of amazing, because I could climb some things free solo at 50-50. Somehow, deep down, I knew that at the end of the day, I would be alive, but it was more like a kind of a faith in myself, not something that you can calculate. You can use the most sophisticated computer. It won't give you the result that actually I will be alive at the end of the day. So it's just a story in between myself and the rock or the buildings. But it is very interesting, because I think this is during those years that I did learn so much about myself, things that I was totally ignoring. As I was explaining to my colleagues earlier, when I was young, I was afraid of height. So meaning there was no way that one
I just
day...
want to show everyone, when you were young, you were afraid of heights.
Yeah.
Okay. And you went up to climb. So how did you work it through?
Well, it's just that I had a dream, and I wanted to become a climber, so I have been working on it, and it's about developing something, If you are motivated for something, you can achieve it. A lot of people that are telling me, oh, I couldn't climb like you, I am afraid of height. And me, I'm laughing, because I said I was afraid of height. Actually, you're not going to climb like me because you don't feel like climbing like me. As simple as that. So things are depending a lot on ourselves, our determination, our willpower for doing this or for doing that. As I always try to tell to the people, we are the storyteller of our lives. We shouldn't forget about it. We can make a mistake, we can move backwards, and we can take another way, and we can succeed once again. I forgot to tell you that actually I fell in 1982, and after this terrible accident, I got 66% disabled. So it means that for me, I was condemned by the doctors. They said that I was not going to be able to come back. And then I felt very, very frustrated. I was 19 years old, and I have decided, since the medicine doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to help me, I will be doing things on my own. And it has worked wonderfully, because all the things that I have achieved in my life, I did it after my accident.
Whoa. That's a very strong message, right? You had an accident, you're disabled, and then everything you accomplished was after that. And I hear, as a common thread, you, Tim, mentioned, the difference between having a team, and in the end, you're going to be alone doing it when you're in space. You talked about the pilot. So it's a teamwork, but in the end, there's people making the decision. Tim, coming back to you, preventing, anticipating, getting ready, right? There was probably the audience, most of the audience won't know, but one of the European astronauts, Luca Parmitano, a few years back, he was doing a spacewalk, and all of a sudden there was a lot of water in his helmet. And essentially, his circulation system stopped working. And like in the movies, you can actually drown on that because it's not that you can open the helmet and go there and take the water, right? What was go on YouTube and watch that video. What was most interesting to me was how he kept his cool. Right? There's water bubbling around you, can literally choke you, and you're just there. How do you guys, in the end, there's practice, but you have to make a call. How do you guys deal with it? You're out in space, you have to make a call, you got to keep your cool. How do you guys deal with it?
I think part of it comes down to your natural character and personality. And during the selection process, we will focus very much on psychological profiling. We're going through a process right now. We had over 23,000 candidates. We're going to pick 4. So it's a pretty tough year-long course for them. But part of that process is picking people who have a natural tendency to be calm under pressure and have that profile to be able to manage it.
Okay.
And then the rest comes down to
That means I
training.
cannot be an astronaut?
Go for the selection and find out. But I think the rest comes down to that preparation. It's for us, it's that preparation and training that gives you the confidence in your abilities to know yourself and to know how to handle situations. And it gives us options. So I would never worry about emergency situations. We had a problem during our spacewalk, during docking, but we always had options. We had done so much training, we had so much knowledge about what we were doing. And it helps you stay cool, it helps you stay focused. And I think we use that adrenaline to actually, in a positive way. We use that.
Was there a moment, you're 6 months there, was there a moment where you lost your cool?
I think that the moment I found the most difficult was after we'd had several failures in the Soyuz. We were trying to dock. Yuri was now down to a manual docking, and then we had a computer failure that took down our cameras. So Tim and I, at this point, as 2 test pilots, were sat there literally being able to do nothing, to offer no support to Yuri other than to hold the things out of his way so he could focus on what he was doing. And that's where I felt the most nervous and difficult, because I was in a situation where there was nothing more I could contribute to, and it was all down to him. But otherwise, if you're in the driving seat, you've got options, then that's fine.
Risk reward. I mean, we're talking about risk management. No, it's for you, Susie. I mean, you are unfortunately one of the few women in elite racing, right? You started at a very young age in karting, and we were talking about it, and you were saying it's not about how good you are, it's also about that, but it's about tenacity. So there's this threshold of risk reward, right? I mean, or keep going or give up. How did you always kept going, and where do you define that threshold of it's enough, I'm not going to make it, or I'm going to continue and I'm going to make it? Talk us through that.
It's really interesting because, to touch upon what Tim said, it comes down a lot to your character. I was a little girl that was incredibly competitive. I loved speed, I loved adrenaline. So I really fitted to racing, and it became my big passion. But sport is brutal. There's only ever one winner, no matter what sport you do. That means you got to know, unless you're Lewis Hamilton, how to cope with failure, because more often than not, you're going to lose and not win. And I think for me, it was that razor-sharp focus. At 13, I had the dream in my head. I wanted to make it to Formula One, and I simply stayed razor-sharp to my goal. And there were definitely some many tough moments along the way where it actually didn't look like it was going to happen. But I trusted my gut feeling, and my gut feeling told me to keep going. And I think because I had such a deep passion for the sport and such an enjoyment doing what I did, it allowed me to overcome the difficult moments in my career much easier. And then, of course, when you've got tenacity and you keep going, eventually things do start to work in your favor. And for me, that enabled me to keep climbing up through the ranks. And and then to make it to Formula One. And something that Alain touched upon earlier, which I absolutely believe in, we're the masters of our own destiny. In the end, it's up to each of us as individuals. And I never believe in staying within my comfort zone. I believe push yourself. It's uncomfortable. There will be very tough moments, but it's where you grow the most as a person, and it's where you're able to achieve things which were initially just dreams. And I heard a very good saying a few years ago, dreaming is so important, and dream big, but a dream without a plan of how to achieve the dream, that's just called a wish.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I see the exact same traits in whenever you're building a company or whenever you're launching a product. I know of many products that had, rocky starts and then went on to become huge successes just because people kept going. I know of many companies, and I'm for all entrepreneurs here in the audience, that, it takes years. People, a friend of mine told me, overnight success, 18 years in the making. Right? And, I was hearing Tim earlier, and he was saying, for the future, going on another mission or not, and he was saying, yeah, it's 2.5 years of hard preparation. And then you might go or not, right? The launch might be delayed. So for all of us here, launching, and it's all about, tenacity and, managing risk to a certain level. Alain, I want to get back to you on something, because we're also, getting short on time. I did this panel, in Las Vegas with Alex Honnold, and he mentioned, first he looks up to you a lot, and he mentioned that you guys never wish each other good luck. And that kind of stuck with me. Why don't you guys wish each other good luck when you're climbing?
Because, when somebody is wishing you good luck, it seems to be unfair. It's like a little bit, you are queuing at the tobacco to buy your lottery ticket, and the guy who is behind you is wishing you good luck. So it means that you're having a chance out of, I don't know how many million, to be the winner. Then, actually, you're pretty much dead. And of course, when somebody is wishing me good luck before an ascent, that's the last thing I would like to hear. I would like to hear, Alain, go for it. I know you're going to make it like as usual. You are as strong as a tiger, something like that. But not like wishing me good luck. That's really bad. Well, now I am laughing about it because I'm used to it, but it's like when you're about to fly, you enter into the plane and people are telling you as a safe flight. And what can I do if the plane is crashing? I am just a passenger. I don't know how to pilot a plane. Maybe there will be a mechanic failure. There is nothing I can do. So yeah, it's kind of a stereotype things that, people, they are used to it. And without realizing that sometimes if you're a little bit fragile, which I'm not, it makes you laugh. Nowadays I can laugh about it.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to. I'm in agreement. I mean, I actually never understood the safe flight thing. I mean, it's going to be safe. I mean, and if it's not, there's nothing we can do about it, right?
You're going to get me thinking when I get on the plane to go home tonight. I'm just a passenger.
So, I mean, I just want to keep, track of time. And there's something that is, I got 2 daughters, and something that is, I'm a big passionate and big believer in, especially, again, in the world of risk, reward, role models. I think it's, about having role models for, young kids, and in this particular young daughters or young females that, they need to have role models. So Susie, you went, after your racing career, you went on to co-found, Dare to be Different, right? Which is for the promotion of girls in racing, right? And, there you have another initiative for minorities or underprivileged kids. Talk us through that, and why are there biases in society that allows, boys to take more risk or to go into racing and girls not? And what can we do, all of us, not only for the girls, boys, but also in our jobs to, understand that there are biases, that there's, different appetites for risk, and how do we contradict that and work that with your example of the Dare to Be Difference?
It's difficult because I think the biases are very subconscious, so you're not even aware that they're there. I set up Dare to Be Different because I had spent a long time in motorsport, and in my whole career I felt it was time to give something back. I wanted to pass the baton on to the next generation, allow them to learn from all the mistakes I made, but also from everything that I'd learned. And it was interesting because in my career I'd only ever done one interview where I wasn't asked about my gender. My gender had become such a big part of who I was, which is strange in a way because in a racing car you're wearing a helmet, so nobody even sees you. It just comes down to performance. And I learned very early on, performance is power. Focus on doing your job really well, whatever your job is. For me, it was being a racing driver, and let the noise fade away. And that's really, I want to inspire the next generation, make sure that they're not facing the prejudices in motorsport that I did. I want to create more opportunity so that more young girls can enter the sport and have the chance to rise. And in the end, we discussed it before, it's about increasing the talent pool. The more participation we get from girls, the more chance we have of the best rising to the very top. And for me, it's just a numbers game. We've got to break down this subconscious and bias that motorsport is just for boys, because with role models, if you can see it, you can believe it.
I'm in agreement, and I'm gonna end up with you, Tim, and then you, Alan. I mean, everyone lands in Heathrow Airport. There's a picture. I don't know if it's a picture of you or it's just a suit, but there's a picture of Tim Peake, and so both the three of you went on to define categories and be the first at what you did. For the people here that are I'm going to say obsessed with reinvention and obsessed with, let's say, pushing the boundaries, Tim, and then you, Alan, very short an advice for this audience.
Well, about reinventing and pushing boundaries, it is about going for it. As Susie said, dream, but have a plan. Nobody has got to where they are in life without extreme dedication, hard work, perseverance. I left school at 18 with a very bad A-levels and ended up regretting it. And throughout the next 10 years, study, I ended up earning the degrees that I needed in order to be applied to be an astronaut and working through that training process, etc. It's hard work, it's dedication, it's perseverance, it's having a plan, sticking to that plan. And I think that having the self-confidence and the self-belief that you can achieve your goals.
Alan, 2 seconds. Any recommendation for these people?
Well, in my side, actually, that was quite easy because I am not depending on anything, pretty much on anyone. So it is more like your own decision that you are deciding to dedicate your life doing something. And I never, a lot of people are surprised because they are realizing that, well, this guy, he never dies, actually. There is 50 years that he keeps on challenging and he's still alive. So finally, people have started to realize that overall, maybe either this guy is really lucky or maybe there is something that we are calling calculated risk. And obviously, I am somehow, I am not a suicidal person. Otherwise, I am really bad because if I have failed for pretty much 50 years, I better change techniques.
Thank you. I mean, we're, unfortunately 2 minutes past. I mean, I saw that the audience actually filled up. Thank you so much. This was amazing panel. I think it was very interesting. And, I hope it's inspiring for all of us. Okay? Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Alan.